Well, welcome to Kingdom Reflections. My name is Wiley Edwards. I'm your host, and I'm pumped to have Josh Swing on us with us today. And Josh is a leadership consultant with Wildsparq, and he's also got his own podcast, the Secret Sauce Podcast. And I hear a tradition on your podcast is we get to say what our favorite sauce is. I'm going to turn the tables on you.
Yeah.
If I were to ask you, what is your favorite dipping sauce, what would you say?
Man, it's changed over my lifetime. I mean, old school days, like way back in the day, if I was in the mall food court, it would be like Polynesian sauce with nuggets. Like that was the go-to back in the day. Right now, I've been on a sweet and spicy sriracha kick.
Okay.
I don't know if y'all have dabbled in the sweet and spicy sriracha sauce at Chick-fil-A, but if you need a little sweet, little spice.
I haven't tried the Chick-fil-A one.
It's good stuff,
Solid.
man. What about you? What's the go-to sauce for Wiley?
Oh, the go-to sauce would probably be shrimp sauce, also known as the yum yum sauce.
Dude.
If I go to a Japanese restaurant, like that's on everything. It's on the chicken, it's on the rice. And then if I'm at Chick-fil-A, because you brought up Chick-fil-A, I'm going a mixture of the buffalo sauce and the ranch sauce.
Oh yeah.
And so like a little combo with the nuggets and the fries and everything. Absolutely.
I'm with you though. Like the first thing of yum yum that they give you, like that's immediately getting dumped on everything.
No
and
doubt.
I'm like immediately asking for
No
a
doubt.
refill.
Just go ahead and give me the whole bottle right there, for sure.
Stuff, dude.
Well, let me ask you this. I know that you are, we're going to talk a little bit of leadership, and I know that you're a believer, you're a follower of Christ. Jumping right to it, how has your faith influenced your approach to leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't even say that my faith has only influenced my leadership. I would say that it's the foundation. Like
That's awesome.
It's just where it all started. If I think back in my life of like where did my passion for leadership begin? I would trace it all the way back to growing up as a pastor's kid. My dad was a pastor,
Okay.
and he was a youth pastor for most of my life, primarily at Shades Mountain Baptist Church for all our Birmingham folks that's over there. And man, I just had a front row seat to watching him live out a lot of leadership characteristics that I knew that I wanted to have when I grew up.
Right.
The way that he selflessly served and poured himself out into other people. I mean, the countless amount of young people that he led to Christ, and even just the joy that he operated with.
Yeah.
Like, he was just fun to be around.
That's good stuff.
And watched him grow the youth ministry there. And so that's where like the pilot light for leadership got lit, that only got fueled more and more and more the more that I knew Christ and made the personal decision to accept him as my Lord and Savior.
Right.
And then you add in some other elements like athletics and sports and all that kind of stuff also influenced some of my leadership experience, but faith is the foundation.
Yeah, that's well said. I think faith is what gives you your why. Faith is what gives you your purpose behind leadership. I think, people can be effective leaders in like certain habits and disciplines that they have. But in regards to like your why, your faith is why you want to be a good leader. I think about 2 Corinthians 5:17. Paul talks about, the old is gone, the new has come, and then he kind of piggybacks off that in Ephesians 4, and he talks about taking off your old self and putting on your new self, and he basically referencing believers. He said, "Don't live like the Gentiles used to live," and he's talking about unbelievers who would chase after worldly pursuits and ambitions. But now, like, you have a greater purpose, you have a greater identity. And so when I think about like faith influencing leadership, for me, I think about like my faith is why I do what I do, right? My faith is why I want to be a good leader, why I want to have, a level of influence where I can point people towards Christ.
Yeah.
So, for sure.
I think to add to that, you mentioned like I think there's some people who could be effective leaders to some extent without faith, but I think you'd be really hard pressed to find somebody who is like a really strong leader for a long period of time that didn't have some level of faith that was incorporated in their leadership.
Right.
And it's like trying to lead without faith. It's like leadership, its roots are in who Jesus was and how he lived his life. That's where most leadership principles come from.
Yeah.
And so it's like trying to play a game of basketball without a basketball goal. It's
Right.
like you may get, somewhat far into a possession, but you're not going to score. You're not going to
Right.
achieve the end result that you want
Right.
to achieve unless there's some kind of faith element.
And the end result really is fleeting if you don't have that foundation of Jesus.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, it's never going to be enough. Whatever you attain is never going to be enough without the fulfillment, the satisfaction that comes with Jesus. So you just talked about a lot of those leadership principles founded upon Jesus. What are some biblical leadership principles you think that are essential for strong leadership?
I'll answer this question, but before I answer it, I'll throw out the disclaimer that I think there's a lot of different
there's tons.
correct responses to this question, and likely it's different for every person.
Right.
The answers that I give are likely different from yours.
Yeah.
And the listeners that are listening, I'm sure that they have different things that are very important to them from a principles perspective. And I think that's the way it should be. I think every person should feel a personal conviction towards those principles that matter most. But for me, it's funny, these are I've formed them into our family values.
Oh, wow.
These principles. And so the first one, there's 3 of them, 3 principles. The first one would be unconditional love, the greatest commandment.
Yeah.
That we would love others the way that God has loved us, which is unconditionally. And some people may be thinking like, Josh, what does love have to do with leadership?
Yeah.
And I would say it's everything. When you
Right.
when you think of love, maybe your mind immediately jumps to like to care for people and to serve people selflessly, and 100% that is love. But also love is having difficult conversations with people.
Yeah.
If you truly love somebody, I think you want what's best for them.
You're right.
And if you truly want what's best for them, you have to be willing to challenge and call them to more.
Yeah.
And so love isn't just this like passive, I'm going to serve you. That is part of it, but it's also caring enough to challenge people to more. I even think about like the story of Jesus and the woman at the well. When he stops and his disciples go on into town and he's engaging with this woman, that the fact that he's simply engaging with her is love, right?
Right. Yeah.
A Jew would not have engaged with a Samaritan woman in that time. So the fact that he was willing to slow down and engage with her was very caring. But then he goes on in the conversation to call out some of her sin, and then to challenge her to turn and repent, and then to go and tell others.
Yeah.
And she does that. She goes in the village, she tells everybody. And I think what a beautiful example of leadership and the influence that Jesus creates in that moment in converting this whole city, because he was willing to first love her and then bring in some truth and call her to more.
Right.
So that's the first one.
I love, first off, before you go to the next one, but I love how that's like anchored in your family too. Like you're talking about your family, because I feel like that's so important for parents to hear. I'm a student pastor, and like loving your kids isn't simply like approving of every life decision they make. And I think that gets especially difficult, when children go from like even teenage years where you feel like you have some level of like authority over them to like the young adult years, and like being willing to, speak truth if you see your children who, are now grown, like making decisions that, that aren't honoring to the Lord, caring enough about them to understand that like I still need to speak truth. And, I think that's something that's important for parents to hear of all ages. So,
yeah, I think the lie that I can easily believe in a situation like that, and I don't have teenage-aged kids yet.
No, neither do I.
To have those kids, to have that level of conversation with a teenager, but I think about conflict when it comes up with whoever it's with, or needing to have a difficult conversation, and man, the lie that I can believe is that I'm salvaging our relationship by not having this tough conversation. I'm maintaining the peace,
right.
And in reality, what you're communicating is I care more about my own comfort and the convenience that exists than I do about this other person becoming a better version of themselves.
Right.
Is really the case that's there. So I think coming to terms with the reality, with the brutal facts of the decisions that I'm making in that moment is all the motivation that I need to be able to step into those conversations that you're talking about and say, yes, I love you, but.
And that can be hard, because like for me, I'm like a people pleaser by nature, and I'm a peacekeeper by nature, and like I want everything to just kind of be okay, and so it can be easy sometimes to gloss over conversations that need to happen. But that's true. You know, if you love someone enough that, you know, you're willing to speak truth into their lives, even when it's not comfortable, I think that is a sign of, you know, being a strong leader.
Yeah.
But what's number 2?
Yeah, number 2 is going to be perfect effort. Perfect effort is number 2. It's it goes back. This is ingrained in me when my dad used to coach our over the mountain basketball team growing up.
Yeah.
We break down every huddle with 3:23 is what we said. So my dad would say 3, and all of us would say 23 as we broke the huddle. 4 Colossians 3:23.
That's awesome.
Which says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, is working for the Lord and not for man." And so the perfect effort comes in where we can't control the outcomes, right? We can't control the uncontrollables. What we can control is our effort and our attitude that we show up with.
Yeah.
And that effort can be perfect.
Right.
The outcomes aren't perfect. We're not perfect people, but
Right.
we can put forward everything that we have in a perfect effort. And this, I like this one goes into really the first mandate that God gives us. The drive element of this is, he says, to be fruitful. In the Garden of Eden, he says to be fruitful, multiply, and to rule and subdue the earth. To be fruitful, multiply, and rule and subdue the earth. And I think, right, there's the literal context of that, of like to reproduce and have children and fill the earth with those children and garden and farm and all those things that he wanted us to do. But I think then there's the leadership aspect of it too, and the discipleship part of it, where we first need to produce fruit in our own lives, work really hard to produce the fruit in our own lives that we need to have. We need to multiply that to other people. And then we need to take more territory for the kingdom.
Yeah.
We don't need to be satisfied or settled with good enough. No, we need to keep going after it.
Right.
So
that's good stuff, man. Absolutely. You talking about, you know, perfect effort reminded me of this. And we can't control all the outcomes, but we also can't control the circumstances sometimes that we come into contact with. And, you know, this is, you know, I have no idea where this person's faith is, but, you know, Urban Meyer talked about event. He talked about this with his football team. He said event plus reaction equals outcome. That sometimes you can't control the event that happens, you know, on the field, but then also in your life. And then, you know, how you react to it then has an impact on the eventual outcome. And I think about that in the life of a believer. Like, we have no idea what tomorrow holds. We have no idea what today holds. You know, we could run into a serious event in our life that changes everything. But ultimately, as believers, we know that this world doesn't get the final say. And how we react to that, you know, will either glorify God, you know, or, you know, it will not be honoring to God. And, you know, so I think that event plus reaction equals outcome. I think that's something that, you know, we can take away as Christians too. Yeah. And that, man, we can glorify God in how we react to the situations that we come into contact with. But
let me add to that, and then I'll get to number 3. One of the ways that this plays out for me, how we reiterate this with children, and I'll mention this story because we're both Little League coaches.
Right.
We both coach kids sports.
It's entertaining.
And I think so much of the time, right, we over glorify the outcomes, right? We get really excited when we win on the scoreboard, and that communicates a lot to children what's important in life.
Right.
And if we're not very careful, we can start to glorify the outcomes at the expense of the effort of what leads to the outcomes. And so we're like 3 baseball games into the season right now. In the second game, we pull off this like come from behind win with the team. And so at the end of the game, we got the huddle going on, and I'm like, hey guys, I am so proud of y'all. Right. It's like, do you know why I'm proud of you right now? And we've got this little guy on our team named Edson, and he's like, cause all we do is win. I was like, no, buddy, that's not it. That's not it. I was like, I'm proud of you guys because you played as hard as you could play, regardless of what the scoreboard says. Right. You gave a maximum effort, and that's all I care about. I think as much as we can point back towards that effort, the outcomes will come later, but as a byproduct of not focusing on them as the end result.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's good stuff.
Sorry, number 3. We're going to jump into number 3. Number 3 is irrational joy.
Okay. Irrational
joy, this inexplainable joy. I think to be a great leader, people have to enjoy being around you. Nobody wants to if nobody wants to be around you, it's going to be really hard to lead people, right? Yeah. And so I think about God giving us this joy that surpasses all understanding because the joy is rooted in Him. And another trap that I will fall into is letting circumstances dictate my joy.
Yeah.
And I need that reminder to constantly pull back and go, no, I can have this joy that honors God regardless of what's happening around me. And I want our family to be one that's set apart. I want people to look at us, in times of hardship or challenge when we should probably be depressed or sad or mad or frustrated or any of these other emotions, but yet we are joyful. And it would make so much so that it would make people ask why.
Right.
Like why have you responded in this way? You should be responding in this way. And what a cool opportunity at that moment is to share
the gospel.
Yeah, share the joy of Christ.
Yeah, your hope is not in the circumstances of this world. That's good stuff. One of the things I was thinking about that, like, the Lord has laid on my heart recently is just like responsiveness. And, I think about the story, and I've been reading through Genesis, but the story of Abraham in Genesis, the Lord talks to Abraham and, calls down to Abraham, and Abraham's there and he's ready to listen. He says, "Here I am, Lord." And then the Lord gives him like one of the most difficult tasks that anybody could ever be asked to do, and which is talking about the story of Abraham and Isaac.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, no, I can't imagine. And being willing to sacrifice his son for Isaac, and you think the reaction of Abraham would be like, did I hear you right, Lord? Like, did you really tell me to do that? And then like maybe wait a couple of days to see if like the Lord changes his mind. Like, I know this isn't what you would have for me, Lord, but what the Bible says is the very next morning that he arose early in the morning and made preparations. And just this idea of leadership being willing to step into whatever it is that God has for you. And, sometimes those are things that seem fun and exciting. And then other times those are like stepping into difficulty and being willing to like trust God in the times where he's asking you to do something that's really tough. And I think that goes back to kind of what you're getting at with inexpressible joy, is understanding that our joy doesn't come in the circumstances of this world, but our joy comes from Christ, and knowing that this world doesn't get the final say, right? And as leaders, you have a different purpose in mind. Like, you have a different, you don't, and we'll get to this later, but I think you don't really define success by the way the world defines success.
No.
You define success according to like what honors and what glorifies the Lord.
Yeah.
So kind of on the same role here. What role does prayer play in leadership decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I'm at my best as a leader when I'm closest in proximity to Christ.
That's good. Yeah.
I mean, usually when I'm frustrated, when things aren't going my way, or when stuff's coming apart, I can trace it back to being too far from God, maybe not being as strong in my prayer life as I should be in that moment. And so I think it's everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I am making the best decisions when I am in that constant state of communication and prayer, which is difficult. It's much easier to say than to actually pull off.
Right.
A huge challenge that I struggle with is like, man, I'll pray in the morning, but then like over the course of the day, there's 1,000 different distractions and things come up, and like I'll recognize that like, man, I haven't been in that constant state of connectedness. So lately I've tried to be much more intentional about breaking up the day a little bit. And so I've got a reminder now at lunch to take a lap around my office building and just say a quick prayer, just to have a moment of reconnection that then fuels me for the rest of it. Almost like a little halftime.
Yeah. And it reframes like your perspective.
100%.
Like as you go throughout the day, and if you don't spend time in prayer, it's so funny how like even a day you begin to think in terms of like earthly things instead of fixing your eyes on like what the Lord would have for you.
I think
go ahead.
I would add to like the prayer piece, something that God's been teaching me a lot recently is also like within prayer, and I think this falls underneath a similar umbrella, is listening in solitude. I heard somebody communicate recently that what you don't contemplate, you eventually exploit. And I think just that like I've had to work hard at being more intentional about just beholding how great our God is initially. Because if not, I'll move into exploitation mode, and my prayer life will quickly just become requests that I have for the day. Right?
Wow. Yeah.
I really hope my kids behave at school today,
Right.
and we don't get a bad report when we pick them up.
Yeah.
Or, I really hope that this person signs the agreement to use our services, or whatever it is that you're hoping is happening. Not that anything's wrong with bringing those requests to God. He tells us to do that.
Right.
But I think if we miss that first part, then it can quickly become disingenuous and inauthentic and all about us.
Right.
And so, man, I will say, like, in the content creation space of what I do, some of my best ideas have just come from this state of solitude, of just trying to be really, really quiet. And maybe praying a short prayer of like, God, I'm listening.
Right.
Tell me whatever you want me to hear.
Yeah.
And as driven leaders, we can be very action oriented, where it's like, give me something to do and I'll do it all day long.
Right.
Like, tell me that I need to talk to God, or tell me that I need to read my Bible. Dude, I'm gonna do it. And I'm gonna tackle that task. But it's much more difficult to sit and be, the stillness.
But it's important.
Yeah.
I've been reading a book that's called Lead with Prayer. And obviously the idea of, be like being a leader in praying. But one of the quotes from the book says this, I'll read it, but it says, "The great lie for leaders is the illusion of self-sufficiency, that we can act as if we have sufficient intelligence and knowledge to solve the problems we face and lead our families, churches, or organizations in our own strength." But the idea is like, that's a lie. And I think it takes humility to recognize your dependence upon God. And I think, what you're saying, like, we can easily slip into like praying for just God to answer everything that we've put on our own to-do list and not listening, for what God has for us. And, prayer only makes sense with God at the center. Like, if God isn't big enough to be at the center of your life, then why would you pray to begin with, right? But we have such a human tendency to put ourselves at the center of everything, And I use this example with our students the other Wednesday night, but like, there was a time where people thought that the earth was at the center of the universe, and I think the reason people believe that is because we have this natural tendency
it's human nature
to put ourselves at the center. And when we put ourselves at the center, nothing else makes sense, right? And like, prayer doesn't make sense with us at the center. But when we put Christ at the center and, we magnify him and we glorify him, then everything else in life begins to make sense, So yeah, prayer is something that's a challenge, like you said, for action-oriented people, because you just want to do. But the reality is like, you got to know what to do, and you got to spend time in prayer to know that. But again, that takes perspective. And so kind of moving forward here a little bit, let's talk about success. How do you define success? Like, what does it mean to be successful?
Yeah, I would probably start by defining like what's not success.
Yeah.
I think the world has a lot of definitions for success. I heard a story that I think sums up the difference between what is and what isn't success pretty well. There's two psychologists from Austria, Sigmund Freud and Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is a phenomenal book. But these guys, what's funny is they grew up in the same area. Like, they went to the same elementary school. Frankl actually looked up to Freud, but there was one major life event that separated them, and it's that Freud got out before Nazi Germany invaded and didn't have to go into concentration camps like Frankl did. So Frankl had to go into these concentration camps, and through his time in those concentration camps, the big thing that he discovered was that the people who made it out, who survived, it wasn't about them. It was about other people.
Yeah.
Like, they were so focused on helping other people survive, and that became their purpose, that it helped sustain them through all the harsh, difficult, ridiculous conditions that they had inside of those concentration camps. But the ones who went into like self-survival mode of like, let me get as much as I can for myself so that I can make it, almost none of them made it out of the concentration camps. And it led to these two different philosophies. And Freud would tell you that the purpose of a person's life would be to gain as much pleasure as possible, to get as much, wealth as you can possibly get, to the biggest house that you could get, to get, the most amount of accolades that you can possibly get, to get the corner office and the title that you want to have. And if you do all of those things, then you will have this sense of fulfillment. And Frankl pushed back against that with this philosophy that he created called logotherapy. And to summarize it, it's our faith as believers. But he says that for you to be successful in life and experience that fulfillment, two things have to happen. You have to subscribe to something bigger than yourself. You have to exist for something bigger than yourself. And then you have to serve others over yourself. And he said, if you do those two things, then you experience fulfillment.
Yeah.
There's a whole life fulfillment survey or study that's been done by Harvard University, as I believe the one that's done it, but it's the longest running study on human happiness that's ever existed.
Okay.
So it started like 70 years ago, I think. And so now some of the people who started in the study are starting to pass away. So they have this full lifespan of study.
Yeah.
And they've evaluated every factor of these people's lives, what occupation they had, and how much money was in their bank account, and where they lived, and all these other things. And what they found is the one unifying factor across all of them, the ones that said, I am happy with the life that I lived. I'm fulfilled. I'm happy with the legacy that I left behind. It was because of the relationships that they had around them. It was because of the people that they had poured into, other than themselves. Yeah. And so I think, backing into the definition of success, what's cool about what I believe success is it's a mindset. If you've ever chased the things before, and I've been in that.
I think we all have, right? Yeah. We all slip into that.
You thought, like where I thought, and I think I still do today, right? It's so easy to drift back into it, to think that like, oh, that new house is going to be when I feel that sense of fulfillment and success, or when I'm driving that new car is when I'm going to feel that sense of success. And anybody who's achieved those things would tell you what you said earlier, and that's that it's extremely fleeting. Right. Like it may feel good for a moment, but
then it's what's the next thing?
Exactly. You just move the goalpost to the next thing, and you immediately feel inadequate and unsuccessful until you get to the next thing. That's just an awful way to live life.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Of constantly feeling unsuccessful. So, I mean, I would say my definition of success is focusing on the right things and being process oriented. I think it's a mindset. Yeah. Right. It's knowing that. It's making sure you stay focused on your why, the reason why you exist. And for us as Christians and followers of Christ, it's to glorify God in all that we do. And then it's focusing on others. It's how is Christ flowing out of me into other people that are around me. I think the coolest part about this definition of success is like, it can be instant. Like anybody that's listening right now, if you're chasing the other thing, you could simply shift your mindset and make it about other people and about glorifying God. And instantly you're going to feel a greater sense of fulfillment and success in life, and less burnout and stress and anxiousness and all those things.
Right. That's good stuff, man. And like what I didn't hear you say there is like, nowhere was outcome in your success definition. Like you talked about process, and then also just like, I think about understanding your identity. And that's a huge part. And so many people struggle with that today. And, it's because people don't know that they were created, or they've rejected that they were created, to glorify God. And like, even like that small step of understanding that takes your eyes off of yourself and it puts it on the Lord, right? And it puts it on others. And, I think about success, and, I think about understanding like who you were created to be, and then like walking in that identity. Going back to that Ephesians 4, Paul talks about the very first verse of that. He says, I urge you to live a life that's worthy of the calling that you have received. And the idea is that, man, like we've been made into this new creation, and now like what success is walking in light of that identity, walking in light of what Christ has done for us.
I love that. I think you could answer it in two questions. I think you say, if you can answer the question, why do I exist? Number one. And then the second question is, what am I doing to live that out right now? And if you can have a clear answer to both of those questions, you're successful. Check
and
mark.
isn't that that's funny, because that is what people want to know. Like, why am I here? Like that. I feel like that's like a God ingrains that question in us of like, why am I here? What is the purpose to my existence? I think everybody looks for that. Like, even going back to think about that book that Rick Warren wrote, Purpose Driven Life. I think it's sold more copies than any other book except for like the Bible, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why is because it's got that word purpose in there, and people want to know their purpose. And like you said, they want to walk in that purpose.
Yeah.
And so that purpose driven life hits at both of those questions. And, I think one of the things that we accept as believers is that's different than the world, is that there is a right answer to that question. There is a true answer to that question. It's not just whatever you deem it to be, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, no, like you were created with a purpose and a specific purpose, right?
Yeah.
And so, but it certainly helps to understand what that purpose is. You can't be successful if you don't.
Yeah.
All right. So now that we've talked a little bit about success, I want to, I guess, kind of move topics a little bit, but it's along the same vein of like balancing ambition and contentment, because we're not supposed to chase the same things that the world chases, but that doesn't mean that we're not supposed to, have ambition.
Yeah.
But it also means that we should also experience contentment.
Yeah.
So what is that balance of ambition and contentment?
Man, this is such a good question. And I mean, it's so difficult, right? I think
it is.
You mentioning it is like, it's a constant balancing act.
Right.
To stay in the healthy zone here. Yeah. I mean, the way that I would think about it is like, I want to be content. The Bible calls us to be content with what we've been given. And it's where gratitude comes from, right? From having that posture of contentment. But it's also like, I don't want to be a bad steward. And
Right.
so I think when,
They think about the parable of the talents.
yeah. Like contentment can very easily turn into laziness,
Right.
Of like, oh, here's my thing. I'm just going to hold on to it for dear life. And then you end up squandering your opportunity to maximize the influence and the impact that you can
Right.
have with that thing. And so that's where I think contentment gets really dangerous, when it drifts into laziness. Of what we have to be very, very careful of, because the parable of the talents, right? You've got the three guys, and each of them were given different amounts of talents.
Right.
You got the two that were wise with them, that went and invested them or
Right.
grew them. And then you got the one that buried it.
Just held on to it.
Just to make sure that nothing happened to it.
Right.
And I think that we can drift into that zone where it's like, oh God, thank you so much for what you've given me. And then you lose that drive
Right.
and ambition to, like I said earlier, to rule and subdue the earth, like to continue to take more territory for Christ with what you've been given.
I like that concept, man. That's a good one.
And then, I mean, the ambition side of things, I think that gets unhealthy when it starts to become about the wrong things.
Yeah.
Selfish ambition is the phrase that comes to mind of where it gets very, very toxic.
Right.
When it becomes about Josh's kingdom and not about God's kingdom anymore, then I need to check myself.
Right.
Or when I lack gratitude, when I'm missing that appreciation that I need to have to what God's given me, then I'm usually in the danger zone or the wrong, at that point in time.
For sure. I think about like when you think about contentment and how easy it is when you get to a place that's comfortable, how easy it can be to just like quit moving forward, right?
Yeah.
And I don't really think that you're actually super content when you're in that spot, right? Because there's always that sense that, man, I'm really kind of not being a good steward of what God's given me, and so I think about what you talked about, like being a good steward means like using the gifts that God has given you to the best of your ability, right? There's a quote kind of going back to the idea of success that John Wooden talked about, his definition of success. He said something to the effect that it's a self-satisfaction that's a direct result of knowing that you did the best that you could do to be the best that you can be.
Yeah.
And again, that's something that's not outcome oriented, right? But it's process oriented, and I think it's a good balance of contentment and ambition.
I think about like even your story, Wiley, with your transition from being an athletic director to stepping into youth ministry. On one of the previous episodes, you talked about that, where it's like, I think the question was, were you concerned about the title change that you were going to have, where like athletic director seems very, prominent and in charge and all that kind of stuff. And then youth pastor is usually kind of, 2 to 3 levels down from the senior pastor of a specific organization. And I thought you articulated very well. You can re-articulate that here on this episode. But I think the unhealthy side of that would have said, both where contentment has creeped into like, man, I'm just comfortable with where I'm at, and I'm refusing God's calling. I'm refusing to steward the gifts that he's given me and where I feel he's calling me to serve. And then also the ambition piece of it, the selfish ambition to say like, I want the title over the influence that God's going to call me to have in this other specific area. And so I'll honor you with that decision of being in a healthy spot with both of those things.
Yeah, and it was like a reset for me because like, I was in kind of the chasing the next best opportunity at like prior to that. So, and not in a bad way. Like I feel like the Lord directed my steps to where I was, but my mind in coaching, you kind of have the concept of like, well, I'm trying to build my career, to the spot, and that was kind of a reset, like of, no, God's calling me to something else. I need to be willing to step into that. Yeah. So, well, I think sometimes people can get in a funk where they, they're not sure that they're where God wants them to be. And, maybe things aren't going exactly the way that they want them to go. And I think you recently did like on your podcast, you had a 5-part episode to like, why aren't you winning, or why you aren't winning in life. What are some perspective shifts that because I think in those episodes, there were some that were like, you need to do this, but then there were some that were like, you need to change your thinking. Yeah. What are some perspective shifts that people can have when they feel discouraged? Yeah.
And I'll first frame this up by saying there's probably a lot of reasons that somebody could be discouraged in their work or at home. And so, I think for me to accurately diagnose the perspective shift, I would need to know more about you personally and the discouragement that you're feeling in that specific moment. But I mean, I think it goes back to where's your heart? How are you defining success right now in that current moment is one of the biggest things. It's like, when I think about times where, I've felt maybe discouraged in my work, maybe I didn't get the promotion that I thought, that I was going to get. Well, really what that goes back to is like entitlement. I think that I deserve this thing, and so now I'm discouraged because I didn't get it. And so, I would say that the first thing is seeing your work is an opportunity to glorify God, and to be focused on the process of just producing the most beautiful thing that you can produce with whatever your work is that you do. If you are an engineer or a mechanic, or if you're in sales, or if you're in customer service at some place, you have the opportunity to produce something, to create something beautiful. I think God, as the creator, created us in his image to also be co-creators with him. Yeah. And I think centering your mind around, like, even though your work, maybe it feels mundane, or maybe you feel like it lacks meaning or purpose. I think that how you do your work gives it purpose.
Yeah, that's good.
And so, even, if you're at home full time taking care of kids, it can be exhausting and thankless and disheartening. Unfortunately, those 3-year-olds don't tell you thank you enough for all the hard work that you're doing.
Not super grateful yet
for them. Right. And so I think like when our when our reason for doing it becomes about recognition and people seeing what we're doing, you're going to be discouraged,
right?
But if it's about the process of honoring God with what you get to do, then it changes everything. And then I would also say, like, we live in the loneliest culture that's ever existed.
Yeah.
And I know that a large
most
part
connected,
yeah,
but the loneliest.
Yeah, and connected,
yeah, in quotations.
Yeah, where like people have however many hundreds of connections on social media,
right.
But you ask somebody how many authentic relationships do you have, and they can't name 5 people that they're authentically connected to. And so I think such an important piece of not getting discouraged and burn out is to have people that pick you up along the way too. Mm-hmm. So those would be
you got to have some depth to the relationships that you have too, for sure. I think one of the ways that people get discouraged is like you said, when you forget like why you're doing what you're doing, and when you fail to realize that, like, ultimately we're all part of something that's bigger than ourselves, and God has us in different places, and I think one of the big mindset shifts that we need to have is, like, God is more concerned, and one of my college pastors said this one time, and it kind of stuck with me, that God is more concerned with who we're becoming than what we're doing. And because really we can't do anything for God that God can't do for himself.
Yeah.
He chooses to use us.
Yeah.
It gives us purpose. It gives us meaning. But at the end of the day, God could do everything himself. But what God wants is his people to abide in him. And you see that all throughout the Old Testament when God is leading the Israelites through the wilderness. And then you see Christ say it, like, abide in me. And, it's this idea of, like, we become so fixated on what we're doing that we forget that God is concerned with who we're becoming. So shifting gears here a little bit, you got a career, you got a family, you're also, active. How do you balance all that? Because you got young ones. I got young ones.
I mean, this is probably, especially from what people have told, even mentors, like, this is the most difficult time period to be able to do it.
Yeah.
This is where dad bods are born during these years.
That's it, man. That's it.
I'm trying to fight it off as hard as I possibly can.
Right.
I think so much of it too is like maintaining fight, just like not giving up. Continuing to pursue it, doing the hard things, like hard now, easy later.
Yeah.
Right. I think about
while you got your energy, and your health.
Well, it's also like a little bit of a, there's motivation here. I can talk about like the fitness side of it first, but it's like, choose your hard, It's not, we play basketball together in the mornings. It's one of the ways that I stay active and healthy. And it's like, I can choose the hard of getting up at 4:45 to go play basketball at 5 a.m. and stay.
I wouldn't choose 5 a.m. if I didn't have to.
That's true.
When I get back, the kids are still asleep. It's the only time to get it in.
But or I could choose the hard of not being able to pick up my grandkids one day because I wanted to sleep in, and not get in the exercise. And so I think the pain of discipline is far less than the pain of regret what it leads to down the road. So I think, a lot of it is the self-discipline to delay gratification and do hard things now so that you can experience some of that later. I do think that it can be a tension, and it's tough, right? When you've got young kids and you want to spend time with that family. To like pre-kids, it would be like just get home from work and go to the gym and exercise for a little bit, and then come eat dinner, and then I can still stay up till 11 o'clock and watch a movie with my wife and have a date night and all that kind of stuff. Just like all fit in. And I thought I was so busy during that time period.
You always think that you're the busiest in the life phase that you're in. Like I remember thinking, like, in high school, I'm so busy, and then college, I had nothing going on in college. But I was like, my goodness, I got a couple tests coming up. Like,
what am I gonna do?
All those times, and then obviously, then you move into being married, and then you have kids, and the kids are like a shock for sure.
Gosh,
but it always gets better. That's one of the things.
So a couple of things that I do to try to stay balanced here. I actually I do this thing called the impossible game as an exercise that I do. And I call it the impossible game because it feels impossible. That juggling act between the way I classify it as B's. So I got being, body, being, base, body, business.
Okay.
Are the 4 B's. And so annually I will do a self-assessment on those 4 areas of my life and just take an opportunity to be brutally honest about what are the facts about these 4 different areas of my life. And what will usually happen is God will expose one of them as like, here's where you're really struggling, where you should focus and put some concentrated effort, establish some goals around this thing, and then revisit it quarterly. So I revisit it quarterly and reassess how those things are going. Man, what's crazy is they fuel each other too. So while there's a tension with them, man, usually when I'm getting up and exercising at 5 or 5:30, you mentioned like I get back to the house and nobody's awake, and so I have some time to also dig into work. I'm awake and alert,
right?
And then also when I'm exercising and healthy and I'm spending time in the Word, I'm a much better husband and father. And how
all right, so give me the B's again, because being is define what is being.
Yeah, it's spiritual.
Spiritual.
So you'd be like your spiritual being, and
spending time in the Word, spending time in prayer. Yeah.
And this is just the pastor's kidding me like the alliteration. Of
I love it. Yeah, you got
B's.
the B's, the 4 B's.
The B's are buzzing,
right?
So spiritual being is first, and that would be my walk with God. What that looks like. My identity, daily practices, all those things. And then I would say base is next. And I consider base my most important relationships.
Okay.
So that's relationship with my wife, Erin. That's my relationship to each of my kids. That's the bigger family that I'm a part of too. Right. My father, my brother, my sister, nephews, nieces, all those other people that are a part of my life too. Yeah. Close friends would also be in that category. Those intimates, that close circle of friends that God calls us to have. And then body would be next. I'm going in order of significance, how I prioritize them.
That's good.
But body would be health and wellness, what I'm putting into my body, how I'm moving my body. Our body is a temple, right? It's a vessel to be able to carry out God's work. Am I treating it in that way? Am I stewarding my body really well? And then the last thing is business, and that's purposeful. Because I think the lie that I can believe is that, business is so important. I need to provide for my family. I need to be out there fighting the dragons so that I can bring home the bacon. And that's what's most important right now. And then once I have enough to feel comfortable and confident, then I'll spend more intentional time with my family, or then I'll focus on my health, or then I'll spend more time in God's Word. And you get there to realize that all those other things are ruined because you prioritized business first. Yeah. I'll tell you a quick story. My first job out of college, I had no idea what I was doing. I signed up to work at a bank, which was the worst decision I could have made for myself personally, in the way that I am uniquely wired and designed. I'm not designed to work banker's hours and to sit in an office
the old 9 to 5,
8 hours of the day.
It is,
God bless you if you are. We need bankers out there that are doing that good work. Right. I want to know that my money is being taken care of. But I remember sitting and I was working in the bank, and it was one of my first couple of weeks there. And this guy walked in that I could tell he was dressed really nice. He's like one of those guys, he's probably got some money.
Oh yeah.
And he comes up to the counter, and one of the crazy things about working at a bank is like you immediately get to see everything about somebody's financials when they ask you to do something. And so I don't remember what he was doing, withdrawal or deposit or something like that. And so he sat down at my desk and I pulled up his account. I was like, this guy's got so much money. I think it was it was hundreds of thousands of dollars in different accounts at the bank. And I think he probably saw my face as like a 22-year-old kid.
You dropped the jaw.
Yeah. That look of astonishment that hit me. And I'll never forget, as a young kid, I'm like, this guy's made it. Like he's got more money than he knows what to do with. He could do whatever he wants. Right. He could build a basketball court in his backyard, which is my dream that I still haven't done yet. I would love to have that. Yeah. But let's
live next to each other, and then we can do it together.
Yeah. Joint basketball court. We'll have to make that happen. And then what he said to me next, it marked me. He was like, he said, don't be impressed by that. He said, I would give every single bit of it away if it meant I could have my health and my relationships back.
Wow.
And I think in that moment, right, it told me everything I needed to know about where I wanted to put my priorities. And so, yeah, I have fought to, and business can creep in. If you work at a nonprofit, it doesn't have to be business, whatever your work is,
whatever it
professional.
is. Right.
Yeah. And for me, business starts with a B. So it's,
right,
easy that way.
Yeah.
But I think that all of the other 3 Bs, if I'm doing them well, I show up as my best self professionally. So if I'm willing to, sacrifice and not complete the project so that I can get home at 5:30 and be able to have dinner with my family, I'll show up and be better for work the next day. But if I believe the lie that I need to produce more or make more money or any of that kind of stuff, usually all the other stuff goes with it.
Yeah, that's good stuff, man. Thanks for sharing. Last question here. What does leaving a legacy of faith-filled leadership look like?
Dude, I've got a story that sums this up well, that tie back into my dad, where we started this podcast, and I talked about watching him, and that's really where my pilot light for leadership got lit. I was at this is like this past year, I was at Taziki's having lunch, which is like, if you ever want to like find a job, go to Taziki's and just like sit there and just network.
It's like all the people.
Yeah,
there,
it's like the number one spot for business lunches. Anyway, I was having a lunch at Taziki's, and I was meeting with a guy, and he knew another guy that walked by, and so they stopped each other and they started talking for a second. He's like, "Well, let me introduce you. This is Josh Swing." And so the guy, he shook my hand. He was like, "Josh Swing, like, are you related to Rick Swing?" And I said, "Yeah, that's my dad." And he said, "Well, your dad doesn't know who I am, but because I was at somebody's house, he spoke to us. It was for FCA. He came to somebody's house and he spoke to us."
Yeah.
And he said, I raised my hand. I decided to give my life to Christ that night.
Wow.
And he said, he probably doesn't know who I am at all, but because I did that, it changed my life forever. He said, I now run a nonprofit in South America. And I'm here, and he's like, he listed all the amount of people's lives that have been saved. And he's like, all of that happened because your dad decided to come to a random person's house in Vestavia and speak at an FCA event that led me to give my life to Christ.
Yeah.
And I just thought, like, I hope that I don't I create such a big kingdom impact with my life that I don't even know the full depth of it until I get to heaven one day and I get to learn about it. Yeah. And so, man, that's me. That's like
amazing.
Faith-filled legacy. Like I want to chase God as hard as I possibly can for the life that he's given me. And then I want it to flow out of me in such a way that people's lives are transformed in the process, directly or indirectly. And then when we get to heaven, I'd love to see the fruit of that.
Absolutely, man. That's amazing. I think about you think about the candlelight service that everybody does, and you get a candle, somebody lights your candle, then you light the person next to you. They light the candle next to the person beside you, and so forth. And just the idea of how you being intentional with one person can multiply. God's design for the growth of his kingdom is just people being intentional in their relationships and then chasing after him, right? We can't do anything from our own strength. It's only from the power of the Holy Spirit that any of us can be effective. But yeah, legacy of faith, I'm with you on that. Man, knowing Jesus and then seeking to make Jesus known to the people around us, for sure. Well, man, I want to appreciate you for hopping on, dude.
Absolutely.
No
let me say, I love what you're doing with this. Even the title of this podcast, Kingdom Reflections, I love that you're having conversations with people. I love that one of them was me, that I got to come on here in the podcast with you, but all to reflect on the kingdom, the big K kingdom.
Right.
But I also think about it of we're reflecting on the kingdom so that we can be reflections of the kingdom.
Oh, that's good.
And so, man, that's my prayer for all of the listeners that are out there that are dialed in for the podcast, is that, yes, that you'll enjoy these conversations and it'll motivate you and it'll inspire you to eventually go out and be reflections of the kingdom in the world.
Good stuff, man. Thanks for sharing, brother. Appreciate having you on.
Yeah, dude.
Hey, and we appreciate our listeners for listening. If you enjoy this podcast, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, and we'll be back next week.